In today's lecture, primarily I'm going into discussing the Old Kingdom. I'll talk about the age of pyramids because that's what it's mostly famous for. I think they built something like, I don't know, almost 80 pyramids I think were built at one point in ancient Egypt. So I'll talk about that. I'll also talk about the Rosetta Stone. I think I may have mentioned that earlier too as well. But I'll go into that because that's kind of important and why they were able to rediscover like the language of Egypt and know more about the culture in general overall. If anybody wants to join me in StreamYard, there's the link on the bottom. If you want to come in, I think Faith is in here. Looks like it. So yeah. And then if you have a question about anything about the lecture while I'm live streaming, let me know so we can go over it, whatever it is. Comment, question, let me know. And then if you want to just ask me questions later through my YouTube channel, of course, you can also do that as well. Hey, Christopher, good morning. Hope you're doing great out there. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, I'm going to continue talking about ancient Egypt. We're still it's going to take us probably today and maybe another lecture later in the week, of course, to finish up Egypt. Of course, today, like I said, I'm going to talk about the Old Kingdom first, which was nicknamed later in modern times, of course, the so-called age of pyramids. So I'm going to get to that. And so yeah, that's the nickname they usually call it, the age of pyramids. One of those three major kingdom periods I talked about before. Remember how Egypt is broken up primarily into the Old Kingdom, you got the Middle Kingdom, and then you got the New Kingdom. Well, the Old Kingdom was mostly an historical period that goes from, the 27th century to the 22nd century BC. So it's basically at the beginning of the Bronze Age. That's the period of when the Old Kingdom was. It's amazing that they built the pyramids, during that time. Like using bronze technology. They didn't have iron or anything like that. And I'll get to it later, but they didn't have like all the technology engineering to build things like they do later. Like they didn't have pulley systems or anything like that, as you know of. The dynasties that were in the actual, we're in the Old Kingdom. Well, what kind of varies on that? Usually, commonly, those first four there, third dynasty, fourth, fifth, and sixth dynasties, those are all considered the ones that are usually in the so-called Old Kingdom, which lasted around 5 centuries. Sometimes they throw in the 7th and 8th ones, but there's kind of a debate about whether those are there or they go into the first intermediate period between the Old and the Middle Kingdom. So it's kind of debated, but usually the first four, 3rd through 6th, is the main ones. Of course, the ones you see on the screen there, that is the more famous, is the 4th dynasty. That's the one that's very well known, that they know most about during the Old Kingdom. And of course, they're the ones that built the so-called Giza pyramids or Great Pyramids of Giza, that of course near Cairo, which King Khufu, of course, was the one that was the most famous, that built, of course, the largest Great Pyramid overall, also called Cheops. Imhotep, who we'll get to a little later, who built the first pyramid for King Djoser, was actually 3rd dynasty. So 3rd, 4th dynasties were the ones that really started building all the pyramids originally. Now, I'll get into and talk about the Egyptians. The one thing about the Egyptians that they're, of course, known for, they were known for building a lot of these burial sites throughout Egypt, which I guess the term that they usually use for it is a city of the dead, or I guess the common term they'll use is a necropolis, the term necropolis or necropolis site. So all throughout Egypt, they have all these different locations where the Egyptians buried their dead. They didn't really like burying their dead where people were living. And you notice on the bottom there, it says that they have these necropolis sites on the west bank of the Nile. And you probably wonder why that is. Some students give me all kinds of answers about that one. But the reason for why they put them on the west bank was because It had to do with their theology. And of course, the belief was that the sun god Ra was eternal, like he never died, the sun. Of course, the theory was that the sun would set in the west like it does. And then what happened was that Ra would then travel through the underworld at night. And then when the morning would come up, the sun would come up, Ra would appear again and go through the sky. And then do this every night, go through the underworld. And so the belief was that that's where the dead went. They went where the sun went down, and all that. So all the different necropolis sites are all located on the West Bank, including the Valley of the Kings and all that, which is like a necropolis site, but that's later. That's, of course, a famous mastaba on the left you're seeing, which they'll build those later, the mastabas. And I'll give you like a list of them, but here's like all the different ones that I guess are famous today that are different necropolis sites. Abydos is supposedly the oldest necropolis site. It's like where I think they believe they found the tomb of Narmer, or Menes was buried there. So a lot of the early pre-dynastic kings or pharaohs were buried there. It's kind of just south of Cairo. Saqqara is near Memphis or Cairo, of course. That's where they built a lot of the first pyramids, like the Pyramid of Djoser, as I showed that little short video. Dashur, about, I think it's like, I want to say 50, 60 miles south of Cairo, and also Maidum, south of Cairo, I believe. Both those are also necropolis sites where they've also built pyramids. Like Dashur is where they built like the Red Pyramid, of course. Giza, which is near Cairo, of course, was built by the Old Kingdom, 4th Dynasty pharaohs. And that's where they have the Great Pyramids or Giza pyramids, like the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Pyramid of Khafre is also there as well. So that's the necropolis site too. The Valley of the Kings, which is like later the New Kingdom, was something that was developed by the 18th Dynasty later. And it's a necropolis site, but it's more like where they built like rock cut tombs, which were carved out of like the bedrock of mountains. So that's where King Tut and all those other pharaohs were buried from the 18th dynasty and all that. Now they have what they call a mastaba or mastaba. It's usually pronounced either one. These are like the earliest tombs that were actually built in Egypt. They go all the way back to, I think, the time of Narmer. They were building these kinds of tombs. And there's different translations of it. The Arabs, who I guess went in and took over Egypt, called it mastaba, which meant either, I think you see down there on the bottom, it means either mud bench, or also they'll say stone bench. They're like really made of mud brick, these types of tombs that were constructed. And then apparently the Egyptians, like the ancient Egyptians, called it Perzit, I think is how they pronounced it, or Perjet, which is the hieroglyphic name, which meant eternal house or house of eternity, is what it meant. It was supposed to be this tomb, which was supposed to preserve the mummy, for the afterlife, so that their soul could reach to the next world. But like I said, during Narmer's time, they started building all these different tombs, and usually the mastabas, if you know about it, the burial chamber was actually put underground. It wasn't actually in the structure itself. They would build like a shaft going down. Then they'd put the burial chamber below the earth, like underground. And I think I've got pictures showing the different mastabas here. But here's one example. You can see they cut a shaft down right there. And then they would put the actual burial chamber down here, where they put the mummy and whatever kind of stores that they would need for the afterlife. And then they built some kind of superstructure on top of it, you can see. And sometimes they would have like these rooms they would put in it, like I think it's used like a type of mortuary type chamber that they might have, like maybe a king or somebody. They could come and create the mummy right there before they put him in the actual tomb itself. So mastabas have been around the longest. They keep using these over a long period of time. The mastabas, you can see it a little better there on the bottom. But I think up to like the New Kingdom, they kept using mastabas. Here's one that's been rebuilt from the fourth dynasty, Mastaba, as an example. So yeah, that's the kind of, I think that's the theory about how the pyramids came about, was that they started stacking up stone or whatever, or at least stacking up mastaba, which they would do with the first pyramid built under the third dynasty of King Djoser. So just on top of each other. So it's not really any kind of, major idea. Just they figured out that the best way to build these structures was to stack stone on top of stone, pretty much. Then you start getting further down, of course, into the third dynasty. The third dynasty, of course, is really the dynasty that really starts building what we call so-called step pyramid, which is the next evolution of tomb building in ancient Egypt. They think, of course, the first king to build step pyramids, of course, was a king named King Djoser, sometimes pronounced Zoser also as well, who is known as also by the name Necherkit. I think he has multiple names. He's actually called, that's his statue on the right. There's kind of a debate about King Djoser, about if he was the second king or maybe even the founder of the third dynasty. We do know that he now lived during the 27th century BC. And the fact that his first pyramid he constructed, of course, the oldest one in the world, was, of course, they think built sometime in that mid-century. Yeah, his statue on the right, which I think is now in the Cairo Museum in Egypt, is, by the way, considered one of the oldest statues of a pharaoh that they've ever found. And under him, there was we'll get to Imhotep. Of course, Imhotep was supposedly his chancellor, which a chancellor was kind of like a vizier that was like a prime minister of some type, who had a lot of political power under the pharaoh. And Imhotep, if you know about him, was considered to be this polymath. He was kind of like a genius. He was a mathematician, an engineer. He was a doctor. He was also some kind of Egyptian priest of some type. And later on, I think during the Ptolemaic dynasty, he was deified as the god of medicine. And of course, in a lot of movies, like you ever seen the Mummy movies, which have been made pretty much throughout the 20th century and later, he's kind of depicted as that mummy character that kind of comes back to life. That's actually him, where they get the character from. Is him. And I don't know how they get this story about, because I think they take the mummy story and they put it during like King Tut's time, which is kind of weird how they do that, more or less. Now, I've got different pictures, I think, of the actual. Here's the best pyramid picture I've got of his pyramid. Yeah, the Pyramid of Djoser, built by Imhotep. You can see there, yeah, it's the oldest stone building in the world. Still is. Of course, built in the 27th century, you can see. And yeah, they believe it was a 6-step pyramid. And you can see it has kind of a rectangular shape to it. It's not exactly perfectly square. I believe the actual dimensions of it's 358 by 410 feet on each side. So it's kind of a rectangular shape. The height of it, it's kind of debated about that, but they believe the height of the Pyramid of Djoser was built to about a little over 200 feet tall, like 203 or 205 range. It's probably about how tall it is. So at that point, that was considered one of the tallest structures maybe built in the world. Like you see, mostly built of stone, like mostly built of limestone. It was its basic construction. And that might be an older picture too, because it looks like in that video, it looks like they had done some more construction on it. But a lot of this has probably been kind of rebuilt on the outside, imagine, over time. You can't see it, but it included some kind of mortuary temple that was kind of on the back side of it. Is also included with it. Also, I have another picture showing you the dimension. They think it was developed from like a mastaba, so they kind of came up with the idea to stack mastaba on top of mastaba, and you can see that the actual burial chamber was put underground, like the mastabas were as well. So they won't start putting the burial chamber inside the tombs until you start getting up to like the fourth dynasty. when they do that. So that's basically, how this particular pyramid first came, to fruition at that point. And then what's going to happen is from there, they're going to start figuring out that, they're going to start smoothing out the pyramid. They're going to start creating these smooth-sided pyramids. But at least throughout the third dynasty, most of the early pyramids were all step pyramids that were copied, from Imhotep's actual designs. All right, then, of course, we're getting to, looks like Jillian. Good morning. How's it going? She's joining us. So anyway, I want to talk also about King Snefru. He was another king, of course, that came right after the actual third dynasty. Under the fourth dynasty, they started, like I said, building these so-called smooth-sided pyramids, where they started taking out the steps, which is what pretty much they do with later pyramids. Snefru is also known as the Greek name Saurus, also as well as S-O-R-S, you can see right there. They think he is the founder of the fourth dynasty. I think they know that for sure. So he's the first king of the fourth dynasty. You can see he kind of lived close to about 2600 BC. Also, one thing that's famous about Snefru, he's the father of King Khufu, who's also known by the Greek name Cheops, who was known for the Great Pyramid. So this particular pharaoh had a heavy influence on pyramid building as well. He influenced his son to build the Great Pyramid, which was even bigger than his pyramids he constructed. Snefru built multiple pyramids at a site called Dashur or Dashur, usually spelled either way, which is located about, I want to say 50, 60 miles south of Cairo. And he built actually 2 or 3 pyramids. There's kind of a debate about all the pyramids he built. They know he built the bent and the red pyramid at Dashur. And then there's also this other pyramid they call the Midim pyramid as well, which was built at a place called Midim, south of Cairo. He may have constructed that or worked on it. They're not sure, but it may have been built by another pharaoh as well before that in the third dynasty. So I think they're not sure if it was a step pyramid or was a smooth-sided pyramid. That's kind of debatable today. I don't usually talk about that one, but I think I have some pictures of his pyramids that, of course, he constructed, which are right here. So, yeah, the two he worked on the most were the red and the bent pyramids, which you see there. The one on the bottom right is Midim. They believe that one was either going to be a step pyramid or it may have been a smooth pyramid. There's kind of a debate about what it was. A lot of the Egyptians call it the pseudo pyramid because it was never really completed. In fact, they think it collapsed later, maybe by the New Kingdom possibly, but it was never really completed. The one on the bottom right there. Now, the ones that are more famous that Snefru built, of course, were the so-called bent pyramid that was first designed. It's got different names. They'll call it also the South Pyramid because it's south of the Red Pyramid, hence the name on the compass. And so there's like one of 2 pyramids that Snefru built. And this one's kind of got a funny design. You can see it was built to a height of about 330 feet tall. The width of these pyramids start to get a lot bigger. I don't know if you know the width of these pyramids, but the width of the bent pyramid was about 619 feet on each side. Pretty equal, by the way. Of course, one thing about the pyramids, if you know about the smooth-sided ones, they're pretty much square on the bottom. Each side is pretty much equal. So it's a perfect 3-dimensional object. You can see there that one thing that's famous about the bent pyramid, as well as 2 things famous about it. One is that it's famous for its 2 different slopes to the actual angle of the pyramid. The bottom slope is about 54-degree angle, and then the upper angle is about 43 degrees. And so they think that was designed that way on purpose. When he originally built it, I think the engineers realized that in the middle of the construction that it was going to be kind of faulty, the construction of it. And later on, it started falling apart, on the edges on the bottom of it. So that's one thing it is famous for having its kind of two strange angles. I've got another picture showing also further back. You can see the bent shape to it, which gets its name today, so-called bent pyramid. Also, the other thing which is very famous about the bent pyramid is that it's considered one of the first major smooth-sided pyramids ever constructed. So what the Egyptians did was they took like a more expensive white limestone casing and they put it on the outside of the pyramid. It goes like stucco or something like that. And so that gave it kind of that whitish looking image. And so they believe that all pyramids were originally white, in design. So they start going away from the step pyramid design. A lot of the stone on the outside is kind of a small size too. You go back to that picture I showed you earlier. You can see how the actual stone is very small on the outside. So a lot of the layers on the outside are usually smaller, and then the stone on the inside, limestone and also granite that was used, was a lot larger type stone and heavier stone that was also used. Then the other pyramid, of course, that they have that follows is the so-called Red Pyramid that Sneferu built. It has different names. They call it the North Pyramid because it's north of the Bent Pyramid. Oh, and also they have another nickname that locals called it, apparently, the Bat Pyramid. Not because Batman's in there, but because bats live in it. Lots of bats, like thousands of them or something like that. Kind of like a cave, I guess. And so, yeah, if you go in it, I think you can still go in that one, the Red Pyramid. And so that one actually was Sneferu's actual tomb that he was buried in. So he didn't use the first one. So like I said, it's the first successful pyramid ever built, like first smooth-sided one overall. And for a long time, it was pretty tall. It was built to a height of about 345 feet tall. The Red Pyramid is still the third tallest pyramid ever built in Egypt, after the Great Pyramid and, of course, the Pyramid of Khafre that was built right after. One thing about that's kind of weird, it was like a lot of the limestone that was used to construct it was used from local quarries, like limestone quarries. That had apparently some iron ore in them. Iron ore is like a kind of a reddish color to it in the limestone. And so it does kind of have a reddish tint to the actual limestone. Hence why they call it Red Pyramid. Although a long time ago, they had a white limestone casing on the outside of it, and you couldn't see all that. But that's where it got its name. But like I said, it was pretty tall, that pyramid, before the other pyramids of the Fourth Dynasty come later. Now, one thing about pyramids also as well, I'll get more into their construction later. Some pyramids could take up to 15, 20 years to build, but most pyramids had a capstone on top, which is called a pyramidion, they called it. And pyramidion. And there's one right there, I think from Amenemhet III's pyramid, which is from the 12th dynasty, which they say that was one of the last major pyramids ever built, which was built by the Middle Kingdom. So I think the theory is that all the pyramids are white, and then on the top, they have the capstone made of granite. I think there's a theory that they put gold on it or something, like they had a gold top to it, and then the whole pyramid was like all white. Now, let me get into next. Of course, I want to talk about, of course, King Khufu in what is the Great Pyramid. So we want to talk about that next. Because that's like the pyramid that's really the biggest one. Of course, we have the so-called Giza pyramid or Great Pyramids of Egypt that they had So I'm going to talk about that next overall. So yeah, Khufu came in next. King Khufu was also called Cheops by the Greeks. He, of course, was a famous king of the fourth dynasty, second ruler. And he's famous for constructing the Giza pyramids, or beginning the construction of the Giza pyramids. They were built near Cairo. They call it the Giza complex or Giza plateau. That's what they usually dub it. And the Great Pyramid, like I said, was the greatest pyramid ever constructed, the largest one ever built in the world. And I've got images of it, but not just the pyramid itself, but it's a huge burial complex, necropolis site that's west of Cairo, which includes multiple pyramids. You got Khufu's Great Pyramid, the top you see there. You got the Pyramid of Khafre in the middle, and then the Pyramid of Menkaure on the bottom. So you got those. There are some smaller pyramids as well, like you got the Queen's Pyramids, which are near the Pyramid of Khufu right here, and tons of different tombs, like nobilities' tombs. They even have, I think, some of the workers are over here somewhere. Like the workers even have their own tombs also as well. Great Sphinx or Sphinx, which you may have heard of, is also part of the same burial complex that's also there as well. So it's built in the 26th century. It's over 4,500 years old, the Great Pyramid. And like I said, I'll get to in a second, it's still considered one of the seven wonders, which is still around overall. So talk about some stats about the Great Pyramid, which of course is well known. Yeah, the Great Pyramid was built to a height, they think it's kind of varies on that, but they believe it's close to 480 feet tall. I think some people say 481 or 482. It's kind of debated about how tall it originally was, because it's kind of hard to tell because it's been stripped off. Like the top, in fact, the upper casing's been stripped off, and then so is all the white limestone casing. It's all gone, of course, on the Great Pyramid. I'll get to the Khafre's pyramid, which is built right after. That one still has some of the actual white limestone casing on it. Each side is equal to about 756 feet. That's pretty amazing. So that's pretty equal today. It hadn't really changed too much compared to the height. I think it might be maybe a few inches on each side off. That's pretty much what it still is today. The area we're talking about is about 13 acres in size. So that's a huge area that we're talking about of where the pyramid is. You can put a lot of famous buildings in there. You can put in there pretty much like the Roman Colosseum, St. Peter's, Basilica, the Congress building in Washington, D.C., Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge. You can probably put like a ton of different buildings within that whole area that we're looking at. I think by Napoleon's time, they had estimated that there's about 2.3 million stone blocks were used to construct the Great Pyramid. I believe they think the amount of weight of the actual pyramid, like all the stone, is like 6 million tons. That's how heavy it is. I know it says that the average blocks are 2 to 6 tons each, but there's some blocks in there, they think, on the bottom of the Great Pyramid that might weigh up to 80 tons, which is like 160,000 pounds. That's amazing. But as you go to the top, like more to the top of the pyramid, the stones get lighter. So I think some of the stones on top might weigh 2 tons, and the 6 tons on the bottom, are probably more down there, of course, overall. Like I said, yeah, it's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. I think it was the oldest one built originally, and it's the only one that survived from ancient times. So that's amazing. And Herodotus, we've kind of talked about the father of history. Herodotus was one of the first to actually write about the pyramid, like how it was built. There's a belief that Herodotus may have traveled to Egypt, because I think he talks about some of the different guides, like Egyptian guides that would lead him into the pyramid. And all that's where he got a lot of his information about the pyramid design and all of that. And there's all kinds of theories, of course, about how the pyramids were actually built. You study about Herodotus a little bit. Herodotus believed that the pyramid, at least this Great Pyramid, took around 20 years to build. He also claimed that that they've had like about maybe 100,000 workers were used in the construction of the Great Pyramid, although it's kind of debated about what kind of labor was used. I think Herodotus seemed to think that they may have used slave labor, but now it's thought that they used a combination of skilled labor and also farmers that were not working like during the flood season. They wouldn't be able to work, and so they would kind of work on this project. And some people think the pyramid construction was kind of like a big national project that people would do for the pharaoh. It was kind of seen as a prideful thing to build this tomb for him. It's kind of like a big WPA project. You know, the New Deal was during like American history. It's kind of like it's kind of like that, like people pitch in and build something. So they think a lot of the workers that built the pyramid were skilled, obviously, to build something this advanced. And without even really any, they didn't really have any of the technology we have later. Like they didn't have pulley systems as far as they know. Herodotus claimed they had lever systems were used. Maybe rope possibly could have been used to move blocks from one level to an upper level. That's possible. They mainly believe that the common theories of how they built the pyramid or pyramids was using human labor, like brute force, to move blocks into place. And they didn't have draft animals, like, oxen or even horses or anything like that. They could move blocks around. It's believed they had some kind of mud brick ramping systems that were used to build a lot of engineering type structures, because if you go to what is the Karnak temple complex, there's actually remnants of ramps that are actually built there that show how they could have brought up blocks to build different parts of structures. I think the problem with a lot of the pyramid is like trying to figure out how they were able to get the blocks that far up to the top. I'm sure the ramp could only go up halfway up or something like that. So there's kind of debate about that. And also, what happened to the ramp? They must have to take it apart or whatever, that kind of deal. So there's all kinds of theories about the Great Pyramid. I know they'll be like talk about aliens and things like that, or it was used to store grain inside. And there's all kinds of fanatic, crazy type theories that are out there, but they're not sure if that's really true or not. Sounds great though. But anyway, so yeah, let me talk about also the inside of his pyramid of King Khufu or Cheops, which is here. You can see that his pyramid was very famous for being elaborate on the inside. It had a lot of different multiple chambers. You can see there's like 4 of them that were there. The false tomb chamber, grand gallery, queen's chamber, and the king's chamber. So you have all these different chambers that were put inside of it. And first talk about the false tomb chamber. What's the deal with that? Well, they think the false tomb chamber was some kind of chamber that was put in there to maybe fool tomb robbers. But evidently it didn't really work. They still broke into it and robbed it. The queen's chamber, there's kind of a lot of debate about that. I know the Arabs called it that at one point. They think it may have used maybe as a tomb for burial chamber for one of his wives, but they don't think that's true now. There's another theory that they put a statue of the pharaoh which represented his soul, his Ka, but maybe not. The grand gallery is a kind of a passageway that goes up to where the king's chamber is. That, of course, was where they eventually buried Khufu, and pretty much it's a plain chamber. There's no writing on the walls. You don't really see writing on the walls in pyramids until about the 5th dynasty, when you start getting the pyramid texts, things like that. You do see a lot of graffiti, though. Tourists have kind of gone into the actual pyramid, and you can see all that's left of it is his sarcophagus, which is empty, which has been ripped open. And also, tourists also would chip away at the outside sarcophagus to take away souvenirs as well. The actual sarcophagus, by the way, is bigger than the opening into the room, which meant that they put that into the room when they were constructing this huge burial chamber originally. Also, if you go back to that picture I showed you, there's some strange things, about the Great Pyramid that's well known. You may have heard about this, but they have these air shafts that go out that are here. There's debate about why they put those in here. Some believe it was put in there for theological reasons, so that the king's soul could leave the pyramid and go to the next world. It's kind of weird. There's also a lot of little tunnels that are in it, small tunnels they found too, which they've put robots into them. And they've actually found a new chamber in it like a few years ago. They put some robots in there. They drilled into like a room. And so they think there's some other rooms in it or chambers in it, but they're not sure what they were actually used for. So there's a lot of mysteries about Khufu's Great Pyramid, how it was designed and built, so on. Right, let me also get to and talk about another pyramid that was constructed as well, which was the Pyramid of Khafre, it's called, which was also built by the pharaoh. The Greek name is Khephren, which I think Herodotus called him as well. So this was a pyramid that was built right after. Khafre was the son of, like I said, son of Khufu or Cheops, and his pyramid was constructed just as large as the Great Pyramid of Khufu. In fact, they think that there's a theory that I think Khafre may have finished Khufu's pyramid and started building his own pyramid. And this one was built to a height of about 471 feet tall. 471. So it's almost as tall as Khufu's Great Pyramid. It actually kind of looks taller because it's on a plateau a little bit. And I believe the actual original width of it, if you want to know, it's about 706 feet on each side, all four sides. So it's about 12, 13 acres in size compared to his father's pyramid. So similar size pyramid. They think it was built more into the middle of the 26th century. And it is very famous for having its upper casing of white limestone. It's still survived for some reason. They believe a lot of the white limestone was stripped off to build a lot of buildings around where Cairo is. It's like more valuable type limestone. And it's not very elaborate on the inside. It has like just one chamber in it, which was eventually discovered and explored in the 1800s by this famous archaeologist explorer you may have heard of named Belzoni, or Giovanni Battista Belzoni. And it got named after him. It was called Belzoni's Chamber, but it was robbed too. I think before he was in there, I guess nobody really knew much about it, but he discovered the actual tomb and what was left of it in the 1800s. So that was Khafre's pyramid. I'll come back to the there's a third pyramid, of course, that they also have, which I'll get to in a second. But let me talk about the Sphinx or Great Sphinx as well, which is also associated with the same burial complex at Giza as well. The Sphinx is basically this famous royal statue that they think was built sometime in the 26th century by the Fourth Dynasty. There's different theories on who built it, but I think the primary theory is that it was built by the king Khafre, the son of King Khufu. And it was built, they believe, to represent the power of the pharaoh, like his strength and all that. And so if you know about a sphinx is like a mythical creature, which has the body of a lion, has actually wings, supposedly, too, with the head of a man. And they believe that the lion was chosen because a lion is powerful and ferocious, which I guess represented the king's power There's even theories that the Sphinx may have been built to guard over the pyramids, like as a watchdog. And there's all kinds of theories about the construction of it. Some, of course, believe that the actual limestone that's there where they built the Sphinx was already there, like going back further, which maybe that's why there's theories that it's older than the construction of it, because it was just like natural outcrop of limestone that had been eroding away for many years, for maybe thousands of years even before that. And whether it was something else, I don't know. It was some other statue or something else. Before that, nobody really knows for sure. But what they think they know is that what happened was they believe that Khafre built this statue for his father. And so the theory is that the face on it is Khufu's face, but built by Khafre. I do have the dimensions on. I don't know if you really have the dimensions of it, but the Sphinx is about 241 feet long. You can see the top of the head. From the top of the head, you can see of the Sphinx, where the human head is of Khufu, down at the bottom. It's about 66 feet tall. And then the width of it from left to right, like if you're facing it, basically, is about 63 feet wide. They did call it Father of Terra or Follow the Terra. It's called different names, I think, in Egypt, which might be more modern names that they called it. But people called it that because people were kind of superstitious of it. They thought that it was watching over everybody. And there was actually a famous story about it that's well known, you may have heard of, which is the so-called riddle of the Sphinx. You may have heard of this, which I think goes back probably to the Greeks, like with Sophocles' story of the Oedipus Rex. But there's a story where if you're a traveler traveling through the land here and you came upon the Sphinx, and it would ask you a riddle, and if you couldn't eat it, it would destroy you. It would kill you. So the other thing there's several other stories about the Sphinx that's well known as well. Of course, back in ancient times, and even I think up to modern times, it was buried like multiple times. It was buried many times. And, it was buried many times. And so a lot of people thought it was like a statue standing up. They didn't know it had like a body of a lion to it. The other story that's famous about it is that it's doesn't really have a nose because in modern times it was believed to have been used as target practice by soldiers. I think it may have been the Turks may have done it. I don't know about Napoleon's troops did it, but they blew the nose off of it, and part of the nose is actually in the Cairo Museum the Cairo Egyptian Museum in Egypt. There's also the dream stele in front of it too, which was put there by Thutmose IV. And Thutmose IV had this dream that if he uncovered the Sphinx, which was buried in sand, that he'd become the pharaoh, and he did. And so he put that dream stele there. So there's all kinds of stories about the Sphinx, etc. Then, of course, you got Menkare's pyramid. That one, of course, is very small in design. It, of course, was the smallest of the three so-called Giza pyramids. Menkare was the son of King Khafre, or Mike Khafre also as well, who came in. And his pyramid, you can see he lived in the 26th century. His pyramid was, they think, originally built to a height of only 215 feet tall. So it's like almost half the size of some of the other pyramids of the Great Pyramid or King Khafre's pyramid that was there. You can see the width, of course, is also 339 feet on each side, so much, much smaller. What's the theories on why it was so small? Herodotus kind of tells some stories about that and his histories about why it's so small. His theories, of course, is that Khufu and Khafre were these cruel dictators that ruled over their people like tyrants. And he, of course, thought they used slave labor and all that. And he believed that Menkare was like a benevolent ruler, like a real nice ruler, didn't want to build this huge pyramid, tomb for himself. And so that's what he thought about that. Of course, other theories they have too is that the pyramid was bankrupting the country, and so they didn't have a choice but to build something smaller. So economic reasons may have been the real reason why they did it. They do have some other pyramids too that are nearby. And here's another picture showing the difference between, you got like Khafre's pyramid and Menkare's pyramid. So yeah, much smaller with that design. That's one of the so-called Queen's pyramids that they have, of course, which is right there. They built like 3 of these near the Great Pyramid of Khufu. That's there. And these were believed to have been built for, I think, 2 of his wives. And I think the one on the far right was built for one of Khufu's his mother as well. So this whole theory that one of them were buried in the actual Great Pyramid, like the Queen's Chamber or whatever, it's probably not true because they have these separate pyramids as well. You'll notice all these boat pits they'll have everywhere too. They'll have a boat pit. I think they have like 5 boat pits that are nearby that are around the Great Pyramid. And they actually built these boats thinking that they would need these in the afterlife. I guess they go on some kind of celestial voyage through the afterlife. So pyramid construction went on like up to like the Middle Kingdom. They were building major pyramids, but like up to the 12th dynasty. But they think that they went away from building pyramids because they kept getting robbed. I'll have a probably documentary I'll have for you to watch later in the week, which kind of goes into that. But tomb robbing was a big business. And so a lot of people that robbed them were the actual workers who knew where all these pyramids were or tombs, and they would just come back and, plunder them basically. And so they went away from building pyramids because of that. All right, one more thing I'll talk about today before I go, of course, lecture-wise today, is I want to talk about the Rosetta Stone, which, of course, was discovered at the end of the 18th century. And that's, of course, very important, famous object that was discovered, of course, in ancient Egypt. And kind of get into a little background about the ancient language of the Egyptians. They call it, of course, hieroglyphs. Egyptian hieroglyphs is what they call the actual ancient language of ancient Egypt, which I believe dates back to like close to 3200 BC. So it is one of the oldest languages in the world, up there with cuneiform. I think both those were developed between the 3 and 4000 millennium BC as a whole. Hieroglyphs is like an Afro-Asiatic language, the type of language that was spoken in North Africa. I think the closest thing to it now today is Berber, which was spoken like, I think in like Libya, Algeria, those areas up to modern times. And it is a kind of language that was a mix of like logographic, alphabetic elements, kind of like similar to like almost like cuneiform. And it was very complicated. You can see like up to like 1,000 characters were actually used in the language at one point. And so that's part of why it was so difficult to figure out how to translate it later when people kind of lost how to read it. Because it's not like, Arabic or Latin or Greek or something like that, which has only a few letters that are kind of used. But it was like an alphabet. It was phonetic alphabet, actually, is what they find out, of course, later. There were different, and I'll get to that in a second, but the term hieroglyph, by the way, comes from 2 words from the Greeks. The Greeks started calling it that a long time ago. And the first part, hiero, means either sacred or priestly, and the term glyph means either carving or writing. So sacred writings or carvings or priestly carvings or writings is what it actually means, hieroglyph. And they called it that because most of the people that knew it later were like these priests that lived, like, I guess, that worked in the different temples in Egypt, because some of these like Egyptian religions were still around up to Greek Roman times when they came into, of course, the Middle East and took it over. They, of course, had different forms of hieroglyphs. You know about that. They had like cursive forms that were used mostly to write faster, like on paper, like papyrus I talked about, or even like they wrote on wood, believe it or not, as well. And those are the chief ones they had. Hieratic, I think, was the first version they developed originally, going back to, I know by the New Kingdom, they're using hieratic, at King Tut's time. And then up to like the late period in Egypt, post-Empire period, Demotic was also another cursive form, which I believe a lot of the lower classes used the Demotic the most as a type of cursive form. So I think that's what they found at the top of the Khufu's Great Pyramid. There was some kind of inscription. I thought it was in Demotic or something like that, used by one of the workers. It says Khufu somewhere up there. Now, hieroglyphs were eventually lost by the Middle Ages, though. People, apparently what happened was the Romans came in who were Christian. They killed off all the priests that knew the language. They murdered them. And so nobody knew the language anymore. And so it became like not a dead language, more like a lost language, and then you had on top of that, you had all these other languages that came in. They were just easier to write and read and speak in. Latin, Greek, Arabic. They were all influenced by the Phoenicians. And so that replaced that as an important language, more or less. So I know I knew how to really read it in the Middle Ages and all that. But of course, what happened was in 1799, they discovered the so-called Rosetta Stone found in Egypt. That's very, very important, Rosetta Stone, because it enabled, people to later translate it, translate the language and understand it and all that. And the reason why it was discovered had to do with in the late 18th century, Europe was in the middle of a war, which was called the French Revolutionary Wars, where France was fighting most of Europe, like Britain, Austria, Russia, Prussia, etc. And the French had this general named Napoleon Bonaparte, who was a military genius who later became Emperor of France. And he was involved in this expedition to conquer Egypt because the British had a lot of trade with Egypt at the time. And so he landed his forces there, took over Egypt for like a year or two. And apparently he brought some expeditions there to study Egyptian culture and its history, because Napoleon believed that there were a lot of secrets about ancient Egypt that nobody knew about. And so he was going to try to uncover it. So he brought all these people like historians and engineers and artists and other people to kind of, study and write stuff down, or even paint stuff or draw stuff. And apparently there was a guy named Pierre-Francois Bouchard, who was a French soldier who actually discovered the Rosetta Stone. It was this half-ton stone that was actually in a fort. It was actually in the wall of a fort in Rosetta, which is in the delta area of the Nile River basin. And the actual stone you're looking at there weighed half a ton, like 1,000 pounds, that they pulled out of the wall. Like, hey, this looks interesting. Well, what they found out about it was that this actual stone was some kind of inscription that went back to the time of King Ptolemy V, who was a king of Egypt under the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty, and who lived close to about 200 BC is when he lived. And they think the stone was inscribed around maybe 196 BC. And what it talked about, if you know about the stone, was that it talked about it introduced Ptolemy V as being the king of Egypt, and it discussed his coronation, him being crowned as king of Egypt at the time. And it was written in 3 languages. The top part is hieroglyphs. The middle part is in Demotic, the cursive form of hieroglyphs. And then the bottom part is written in Greek. Why do they have it in different languages? Because not everybody knew hieroglyphs. You had some people only knew Greek, and so they wrote it in that as well. Apparently, there was a gentleman named Jean-Francois Champollion. He got a copy of it. He was like some kind of French scholar that was a philologist. He studied like languages. Yeah, and what he figured out about the Rosetta Stone in the language of the Egyptians is that if he used Coptic, he could figure it out. He was an expert on Coptic. Coptic was a type of form of Greek He used Greek letters, but he was actually Egyptian from Demotic. And so he was able to use that to eventually figure out Demotic. And then from there, he could figure out hieroglyphs. So it's kind of like a code, I guess, more or less. And Coptic is still used today by the Christians in Egypt, called the Copts or Coptic Christians as well, or Coptic Church as well. So Champollion went on and translated by the 1820s, 1822, maybe they think he translated the Rosetta Stone. And however, what happened to the stone, if you know about it, the British eventually kind of defeated Napoleon, if you know about this, and they ended up with the stone and ended up in Britain. That's where all the controversy started, if you know about it. If you know about the whole deal with it, there's a big controversy over its ownership, like who should get the Rosetta Stone. Should it be the Egyptian government today, that's the Republic of Egypt, or should the British get it? Because if you know about it, it resides now in the British Museum in London. So that's a big controversy. The Egyptians really want it back, if you know about that. But I don't think the British want to give it back to them. In fact, a lot of these countries like Britain, France, and others have a lot of Egyptian artifacts, which they took back in, I think, the 1800s or early 1900s. And a lot of them won't give it back, which is, like I said, a big controversy. So anyway, that's kind of like the most of the lecture today, of course, on ancient Egypt. Part 2, of course. Later in the week, on Wednesday, I'll have a part 3 coming up where I'm going to wrap up ancient Egypt. I'm going to talk mostly about the New Kingdom, which comes in. I don't usually cover much on the Middle Kingdom. It's kind of a weak state. I might briefly talk about that, but primarily I'll talk about the New Kingdom and all the famous pharaohs that ruled over it. Hatshepsut, I heard of Akhenaten, King Tut. I'll talk about Ramses the Great, and so on. So before I go, I want to remind you, don't forget about that quiz, of course, y'all got. Ancient Mesopotamia, that's still up. I'm going to keep, of course, sending reminders out about it towards you. But don't forget to take that and get that complete. You should also be working on your vocab, also as well. Also, don't forget, if you have any questions, comments about this lecture, let me know. I don't think we had any. I could double check on that, but I don't think anybody had any comments, questions today about it. So if you got a question, comment later, if you want to ask me about this lecture, you can just, send a comment through YouTube. And if you have a comment about the class, just let me know later via email and all that. So that's it for today. Hope y'all having a great week out there. But like I said, next week, I'm thinking about having an exam coming up. Likely our exam is going to be probably on prehistory, Mesopotamia, and also Egypt. So it's going to be a major assignment coming up. So that's it for this lecture today. And I'll see you later in the week on Wednesday. So take care.